On 25 October 1944 dawn, breaks east of Samar Island, Philippines, where Task Unit 77.4.3, known as Taffy 3, operates under Rear Admiral Clifton A. F. Sprague. 6 Casablanca-class escort carriers, 3 Fletcher-class destroyers, and 4 John C. Butler-class destroyer escorts provide air support for the Leyte landings. Their maximum speed is barely 19 knots at full power. A TBF Avenger from the escort carrier Street Low climbs through the morning haze, its pilot scanning the horizon. He spots pagoda masts, a massive rising sun flag, and the unmistakable silhouette of the battleship Yamato. Radio crackles, a Japanese force, 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 11 destroyers, bears down from the northwest. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, having slipped unopposed through San Bernardino Strait during the night drives for the Leyte invasion shipping. Sprague aboard Fanshawe Bay grasps the stakes. Taffy 3 stands alone between Kurita's battleships and the vulnerable transports in Leyte Gulf. Japanese 18.1-inch guns on Yamato and 14-inch guns on Congo-class ships outrange and overpower Taffy 3's 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns. Shell splashes erupt around the escort carriers, their thin hulls shuddering. Sprague orders the carriers to turn southeast, pushing engines hard, and launches every aircraft. Avengers and Wildcats, some armed only with depth charges or machine guns. Destroyers Johnston Hole and Heermann lay smoke-gray curtains, billowing to shield the carriers. Destroyer escorts Raymond Dennis, John C. Butler, and Samuel B. Roberts reposition to guard the formation's flanks. Kurita on Yamato's bridge expects to overrun an invasion fleet. His center force, built for decisive battle, carries armor and firepower to crush light ships in a single encounter. Yet the Avengers' report disrupts his assumptions. Japanese lookouts confirm small carriers and escorts, not the heavy Third Fleet carriers he expected. Kurita presses south guns, trained on the fleeing carriers. On Johnston Commander Ernest E. Evans makes a snap decision. Without waiting for orders, he swings his destroyer toward the enemy, 5-inch guns firing at more than 15,000 yards. Japanese observers, seeing a lone ship charge through shell splashes, misjudge her as a larger cruiser. Hole and Heermann prepare to follow their crews, watching battleship salvos churn the sea. Sprague faces a brutal choice: keep his escorts in a defensive screen or send them head-on against a superior force. Evans's action forces his hand. He signals a general attack, committing his destroyers to torpedo runs. Samuel B. Roberts, a destroyer escort, accelerates far beyond her design speed, sprinting to nearly 29 knots and running in the wake of the larger destroyers. Her crew, trained for anti-submarine work, readies torpedoes and 5-inch guns for surface battle. In the air, pilots claw away from the carrier decks, some carrying bombs, others only gun ammunition. Their orders are simple: harass Kurita's ships, disrupt their aim, protect the carriers at all costs. Japanese gunners track the carriers through gaps in the smoke, but the destroyers' aggressive moves draw fire. Kurita's formation tightens and staggers as captains adjust to the unexpected counterattack, some whispering about a possible trap. Japanese captains curse the smoke veiling their targets. Shells fall blindly, missing carriers that should have been easy kills. Taffy 3's escorts, outgunned and lightly armored, rely on speed, nerve, and volume of fire. The destroyers' 5-inch guns hammer at up to 20 rounds a minute per barrel, a steady wall of steel thrown at battleships and cruisers. The sea boils with splashes, and the carriers slip farther to the southeast behind smoke and rain squalls. Sprague's gamble hinges on chaos, smoke screens, diving air attacks, and destroyer charges to fracture Kurita's advance long enough for the transports to remain out of reach. The engagement's first minutes reveal Taffy 3's defiance. Against battleships designed for annihilation, the tin can crews choose not to run, but to turn and fight. Commander Ernest E. Evans steers Johnston through towering shell, splashes her 5-inch guns blazing at roughly 15,000 yards. His bridge crew watches Japanese battleship salvos straddle the ship water columns, erupting close off the bow. Johnston's torpedoes arm 10 mark 15 seconds, ready for a single full salvo. Evans drives in toward the lead Japanese column, closing to about 10,000 yards and singling out the heavy cruiser Kumano, flagship of the vanguard. Shortly after 0720, Johnston fires her full spread. One torpedo slams into Kumano's bow, shredding steel and forcing the cruiser to drop out of line and limp away at reduced speed. Japanese lookouts, stunned by the destroyer's audacity, report a larger ship charging through the spray. Johnston weaves back into the smoke, her 5.5-inch guns hammering in rapid salvos, harassing cruisers and battleships alike. Hull under Commander William D. Thomas follows Sprague's attack order and charges straight at Kurita's battleships. Her narrow silhouette dodges 14-inch splashes as she drives in for a torpedo run. Hull's 5-inch guns pepper the oncoming Japanese capital ships and cruisers, forcing gunners to shift aim and correct range. Shortly after 0730, Hull launches torpedoes toward the advancing line, and Japanese battleships sheer away to avoid the tracks, bending their pursuit away from the carriers. Hull presses closer at flank speed, closing the range until 8-inch cruiser shells tear into her hull. After more than 40 shell hits, steering fails. She lists guns falling silent and finally sinks around 0855. Her torpedoes expended and her job done. Heermann, commanded by Commander Amos Hathaway, weaves through rain squalls and shell splashes, engaging both battleships and cruisers in turn. Around 0750, she fires torpedoes at the battleship, Haruna forcing another evasive turn that twists the Japanese line. Heermann's 5-inch guns rake the cruiser Chikuma, scoring hits along her superstructure and masts. Shells graze Heermann, damaging her radar and tearing metal from her decks. But she remains afloat, darting between smoke clouds to interpose her hull between the carriers and Kurita's guns. Her crew reloads under fire, keeping a steady stream of 5-inch shells on Japanese ships and adding to the confusion. Samuel B. Roberts, a destroyer escort, joins the fray, her single, 5-inch gun firing as fast as the crew can serve shells. Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Copeland pushes her far beyond her design limits, driving her to nearly 28 knots and charging toward the heavy cruisers as if she were a full destroyer. Roberts launches her torpedoes and then closes to gun range, trading fire with Chikuma and scoring hits that smash into the cruiser's upper works. 8-inch shells answer, gutting Roberts' machinery spaces and wrecking her hull, but she keeps firing until power fails. At about 0945, she rolls and sinks her crew, abandoning ship under continuing fire. Above, Taffy 3's aircraft swarm Kurita's ships. Avengers drop 500-pound bombs and torpedoes at battleships and cruisers. Near-miss blasts and fires will later help doom ships like Suzuya. Wildcats strafe with 50-caliber guns, then make dry runs when their bomb racks are empty, diving again and again to distract gunners. Planes from Taffy 2 join the attack, spreading torpedo and bomb runs across the Japanese line. Under this pressure, heavy cruisers such as Chokai and Chikuma are crippled and forced out of formation, and by the end of the day, Chokai, Chikuma, and Suzuya will all be lost to the accumulated damage of bombs, fires, and internal bun. Explosions. Gambier Bay, caught by the gunfire of Yamato and accompanying cruisers, takes fatal hits. Her deck burns fiercely as she slows, and she sinks around 0907, the only United States carrier lost solely to enemy surface gunfire in the war. Japanese captains, tracking wave after wave of air attacks, struggle to distinguish small escort carriers from the fleet carriers they fear. Smoke and squalls obscure their gunnery solutions, and the constant threat of torpedoes from destroyers and aircraft forces repeated course changes. On Yamato, Kurita faces mounting confusion. Destroyers and a single destroyer escort have drawn blood. Heavy cruisers are crippled or burning, and air attacks persist, even when American planes carry only light ordnance. Japanese doctrine falters. Small ships were never meant to press home attacks against battleships in this way. Chokai and Chikuma are out of the fight. Suzuya is fatally damaged, and Kumano limps away with her bow torn open. Kurita's advance slows his formation, splintered by evasive turns. Taffy 3's carriers, still making barely 19 knots, gain distance behind their screen of smoke and rain. The sea churns with oil slicks and wreckage, but Sprague's desperate gamble holds, and the tin cans charges begin to turn a battleship onslaught into a hesitant retreat. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita aboard Yamato stares through smoke and squalls as his center force begins to unravel. By around 0900, heavy cruisers, Chokai and Chikuma are crippled, and out of the fight, Suzuya is burning and badly damaged, and Kumano crawls northwest with her bow blown open. Taffy 3's destroyers, though bleeding, have forced his battleships and cruisers to turn again and again, dodging torpedoes launched from ranges around 10,000 yards. Escort carrier aircraft, some armed only with depth charges or a few small bombs, dive relentlessly, their attacks splintering Japanese formations and keeping gunners' heads up. Kurita's crews struggle to track the escort carriers now over 10 miles distant and edging away at barely 19 knots. Radio reports add to the confusion as pilots and lookouts mistake the small jeep carriers for Halsey's big fleet carriers, inflating the threat. On the bridges of Japanese ships, officers curse the veils of smoke and rain that break their firing solutions. Sprague's escorts, battered but defiant, press their attacks. Heermann, weaving between battleship salvos, drives in and fires her remaining torpedoes toward the oncoming cruisers, forcing yet another round of evasive maneuvers that bend the Japanese line away from the fleeing carriers. Her 5-inch guns keep up rapid, steady salvos, raking Chikuma's superstructure and splashing shells around Yamato's tall pagoda mast, adding to the sense of being under fire from all directions, even if the big armor holds. Johnston, already crippled by heavy-caliber hits, re-emerges from the smoke, her crew firing, as long as the guns will cycle. She finally goes down around 1010, Commander Ernest Evans, among the missing. Samuel B. Roberts, gutted by concentrated cruiser fire after her own charge, has already slipped beneath the waves, her torpedoes expended. Hull's wreckage marks another patch of sea, her sacrifice measured in the minutes she bought. Gambier Bay's loss stings, but the surviving carriers Fanshawe Bay Street, Low White Plains, Kalanin Bay, and Kitkun Bay churn southeast behind their smoke and rain curtain, still launching aircraft. On Yamato's bridge, Kurita feels doctrine crumbling under his feet. Japanese planners had banked on battleships, breaking lighter forces in a single, decisive clash. Instead, destroyers, destroyer escorts, and small carriers have met his line with torpedoes, smoke, and constant air attack. Memories of Musashi sunk the previous day under waves of carrier planes hang over his officers. Now cruisers are disabled, or burning battleships are repeatedly turning away from torpedo reports, and aircraft, from both Taffy 3 and Taffy 2, keep pressing home attacks, even when armed with light ordnance. Kurita, unsure of where Halsey's Third Fleet actually is, and wary of being caught between carrier task forces, sees no clear path to the invasion anchorage. Around 0930, he orders his force to break off and turn northwest, abandoning the approach to Leyte Gulf. Japanese captains blink in disbelief as the order ripples out lightly. Built tin cans and escort carriers have broken a battleship advance. The surface engagement has lasted barely a few hours, yet it has overturned pre-war assumptions about what capital ships can safely do. Sprague's surviving carriers launch fresh strikes to harry the retreat even as the price mounts. Late that morning, a kamikaze crashes into Streetlow, detonating her bomb-laden hangar and sending her to the bottom. The cost is brutal. Johnston Hull, Samuel B. Roberts, Gambier Bay, and Streetlow are gone with hundreds of sailors dead or adrift, but Taffy 3's stand holds the line. Kurita's center force, still carrying 4 battleships, but shaken and scattered, never reaches the invasion shipping. The battle off Samar shows that aggressive destroyers and carrier aviation working together can halt even the heaviest gun line, and it forever changes what the world believes tin cans can do. The sea off Samar grows quiet by noon on 25 October 1944. But the cost of Taffy 3's defiance scars the horizon. Johnston lies in more than 3,000 fathoms of water, her hull torn open by heavy-caliber shells. Hull and Samuel B. Roberts rest nearby on the ocean floor, their decks silent after taking scores of hits. Gambier Bay, battered first by battleship salvos and then by cruiser fire, has gone down around 0907, her crew clinging to rafts on the swells. Street, low struck by a kamikaze shortly before 11 o'clock, burns and explodes, sinking about 1,125 and adding to the toll. Survivors bob in oil-slicked waves, waiting hours for rescue, some until dusk. More than 1,000 men from Taffy 3 will not return their ships, trading steel and lives for the time the invasion fleet needed. The surviving escort carriers, Fanshawe Bay, White Plains, Kalanin Bay, Kitkun Bay, limp southeast at their slow escort carrier speed, hulls scarred but still afloat. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, retreating to the northwest, never reaches the Leyte Gulf transports. 4 battleships, including Yamato and several cruisers, remain under his flag, but the loss of Chokai Chikuma, Suzuya, and the crippling damage to Kumano have cut into his striking power. The larger Battle of Leyte Gulf, fought from 23 to 26 October, seals Japan's naval fate. In Surigao Strait, American battleships crossed the Japanese T and crushed the southern force. Off Cape Engano, Halsey's fast carriers tear apart the decoy northern force. Kurita's withdrawal from Samar ensures the Leyte landings proceed, anchoring the liberation of the Philippines. Japanese naval power, built for decades on battleship doctrine, will not recover from this week. American destroyers and escorts closing to torpedo range and pouring out rapid 5-inch fire at close quarters help prove that small ships handled aggressively can shape the outcome of a fleet action. Taffy 3's stand becomes the clearest example. Rear Admiral Clifton A.F. Sprague, aboard Fanshawe Bay, receives the reports of ships lost, crews missing, and enemy forces turned back. Task Unit 7, 7.4.3, earns a Presidential Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism against overwhelming odds. Commander Ernest E. Evans, who took Johnston into his first bold charge without waiting for orders, receives the Medal of Honor posthumously. Officers and men of Whole Heerman Samuel B. Roberts and the carriers receive Navy Crosses and Silver Stars, their actions written into naval history. The Tin Can, nickname once a joke about thin-hulled destroyers, becomes a badge of honor. Destroyer veterans embrace the title Tin Can Sailors, forever tied to the morning off Samar when their ships attacked a battle line. The engagement reshapes how navies think about surface war. Battleship-centered fleets, long Japan's pride, falter under coordinated destroyer tactics and carrier air power. Taffy 3's use of smoke, hard turning, torpedo runs, and relentless attacks by aircraft, some carrying only 50 caliber guns or light bombs, shows how agility, communication, and nerve can offset raw gun caliber and armor. In the post-war U.S. Navy, the lessons are clear. Carrier aviation and destroyer screens sit at the core of blue water doctrine, with battleships fading into the background. Deep-sea expeditions decades later find the wrecks and trace these decisions on the seabed. Johnston's wreck, first located in 2019 and later surveyed at over 21,000 feet, reveals her bow crumpled, but guns still pointed skyward. New ships, bearing the names Samuel B. Roberts and Ernest E. Evans, carry the story forward, their keels laid in tribute to the men of Taffy 3. Japanese officers looking back on Samar admit the shock tin cans were never meant to fight like that. The battle story endures in war colleges and wardrooms as a case study in how courage, tactical judgment, and engineering can bend the odds. Taffy 3's slow escort carriers and 5-inch guns, backed by pilots willing to dive through flak with whatever ordnance they have left, help to close the era of the battleship and mark the ascendancy of carriers and their destroyer. Escorts. By around 0930 on 25 October 1944, smoke and flame still hang over the sea east of Samar as Taffy 3 fights to stay alive. On the escort carrier Kalinin Bay, gun crews crowd around her single 5-inch gun on the stern, working it in rapid fire against the Japanese cruisers that have closed the range. Shells punch through her flight deck and tear open her hangar splinters, whipping through catwalks and gallery decks, but the gun crew keeps loading and firing, passing ammunition through smoke and steam as the ship shudders under each near miss. On the bridge, Captain Thomas Binney Williamson orders hard turns to throw off the enemy's aim, driving Kalinin Bay at her full escort carrier speed. Lookouts call out the fall of shot as 8-inch shells splash closer off the quarter. Deep below, engineers keep the boilers fed and the shafts turning, coaxing every knot they can from machinery shaken by concussion. Her Wildcats and Avengers, flown off earlier in the chaos circle, back low on fuel and light on ordnance. Pilots spot Japanese heavy cruisers and dive through the flak, some with bombs or rockets, others with nothing but 50 caliber guns. They go in anyway, strafing bridges and decks, forcing ships like Haguro and Tone to turn or throw up more anti-aircraft fire instead of steadying their aim on the retreating carriers. Each attack run buys seconds, and seconds matter. A short distance away, the destroyer Heerman still weaves between columns of water thrown up by battleship salvos. Commander Amos Hathaway works the helm and engines to keep his ship just inside her limits, turning toward threats to lay smoke, and then back again to bring his 5-inch guns to bear. Heerman's turrets hammer away at a Japanese heavy cruiser and at the silhouettes of big ships in the rain squalls, trading steel with opponents that outweigh her many times over. She has already taken 8-inch hits and near-miss explosions that flooded her bow. but her remaining guns and torpedoes are still in the fight. In the handling rooms and magazines, sailors haul shells and powder by hand around twisted metal, shouting over the roar of the guns. White Plains, another Casablanca-class escort carrier, works her own narrow margin. Her crew arms Avengers with what remains in the magazine's 500-pound bombs, where they have them depth charges where they do not. Pilots launch into a sky filled with bursts of black and white flak, climbing just enough to find a target before rolling in. Some press mock torpedo or bombing runs when their racks are empty, using the threat of attack to pull Japanese fire away from the carriers and the damaged destroyers. To Japanese gunners trying to track silhouettes through smoke, it feels as if the air is full of American planes. Behind the small boys, the destroyer escorts Dennis Raymond, John C. Butler, and Samuel B. Roberts do what their slim hulls allow. Dennis and Raymond run at the edge of the formation, throwing up smoke and firing their twin 5-inch mounts at the nearest cruisers. Shell splashes walk toward them as Japanese gunners shift aim, but the escorts keep firing, walking their own salvos onto enemy superstructures and fire control positions. One destroyer escort takes heavy caliber hits that smash into her superstructure and knock out a gun, yet she stays on station screen intact. Another emerges from the morning's fight without serious damage, but with her barrels scorched from continuous fire and her crews half-deaf from the concussion. Out on the horizon, the heavy cruiser Suzuya and other survivors of the center force reel, under the combined effect of bomb hits, near misses, and their own unstable torpedo batteries. Fires and internal explosions begin to punish the Japanese line. In the confusion, no single American ship can claim a clean kill, but the pattern is unmistakable. Destroyers, destroyer escorts, and escort carrier aircraft, all designed for secondary roles, are now tearing at the flanks of one of Japan's main striking forces. On Japanese bridges, officers watch through rangefinders as American tin cans and small carriers refuse to break away. Ships that pre-war tables of organization consigned to patrol and escort duty are now turning into fire torpedoes, laying smoke within sight of battleships and driving light aircraft again and again against heavy cruisers. Charts and staff estimates had promised an easy destruction of slow, lightly built escorts. Instead, Kurita's captains see their formations masked by smoke, their gunnery distracted by close-in attackers, and their ships forced into constant evasive maneuvers just to avoid torpedoes and diving bombers. By mid-morning, Taffy 3's carriers are edging beyond the most dangerous range of the Japanese cruisers, still making their modest escort speeds, but covered by haze, rain squalls, and the stubborn wall of tin cans between them and the ported enemy line. On Kalinin Bay, men stand fast at the 5-inch gun loading and firing, even as the ship counts more shell hits and a kamikaze strike later in the day. On Heermann, damage control parties fight flooding and keep power flowing to the remaining guns. On the destroyer escorts, gun crews swab overheated barrels and reach for whatever ammunition is left. For the Japanese officers who once laughed at the thin-sided American destroyers and escorts the scene off Samar is something different. Small ships driving into big gun fire, aircraft attacking with whatever they have, and a battle line built around the world's largest battleship, slowly losing its grip. The bold charges that began with Johnston's first turn toward the enemy are now multiplied across the screen. Every minute bought by these tin cans pushes Kurita's force farther from its chance at the invasion fleet and closer to the moment when he will turn away. By mid-morning on 25 October 1944 east of Samar, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force begins to lose momentum. Yamato's 18.1-inch guns still fire, but her salvos fall short or wide of Taffy 3's escort carriers, now edging farther away behind smoke and rain squalls. The doctrine that promised a decisive battleship engagement strains under a kind of fight it was never built for. American destroyers and destroyer escorts keep closing in and turning back out, laying smoke, launching torpedoes and throwing 5-inch shells at the nearest silhouettes. Carrier aircraft, sometimes carrying only light bombs or machine gun ammunition, dive through bursts of flak to harass the Japanese line, forcing ships to maneuver and gunners to split their attention. Heermann, damaged but still under control, works back and forth between Kurita's columns. Her guns fire in rapid, steady salvos at a heavy cruiser and at the looming shapes of larger ships beyond, adding splashes and bursts around enemy bridges and fire control positions. Each turn risks new hits from battleship and cruiser fire, yet the destroyer keeps shifting course to protect the carriers and threaten torpedo attack. Behind her destroyer, Escorts like Dennis and Raymond lay new smoke curtains and aim their own 5-inch guns at approaching cruisers, firing as quickly as the crews can serve shells. Some shots fall short, others crash into Japanese upper works, but the effect is cumulative. The Japanese formation spends more time turning away from perceived torpedo tracks and adjusting to smoke than driving straight for Leyte Gulf. On Yamato's bridge, Kurita receives fragmentary reports. Heavy cruisers that were meant to sweep aside escorts are instead battered and scattered. Chokai and Chikuma are crippled, and out of the battle, Suzuya is badly damaged and will not survive the day, and Kumano limps away with her bow wrecked. Torpedo attacks from Taffy 3's destroyers and destroyer escorts, launched at much closer ranges than pre-war tables envisioned, have already forced radical evasive maneuvers. Airstrikes from the small U.S. carriers continue despite light ordnance, with pilots pressing attacks or feints whenever they can find a target. Radio messages and visual sightings misread the escort carriers as larger fleet carriers, amplifying the perceived threat and raising the risk that a much stronger American force may be just beyond the haze. The turning point takes shape not in a single salvo, but in the accumulation of damage, confusion, and lost time. Japanese battle plans tuned for a single clean clash of battle lines do not easily accommodate a running fight against smoke torpedoes and persistent air attack. Battleships that were designed to engage at long range find themselves expending ammunition on elusive destroyers and distant carriers they cannot reliably hit. Kurita weighs the losses already taken, the crippled cruisers falling away, the uncertainty about the whereabouts and strength of American fast carriers, and the risk of pressing on into what may be a larger trap. By late in the morning, he orders his force to turn away from Leyte Gulf and head back to the north and west, breaking contact with Taffy 3 and abandoning the chance to strike the invasion shipping. For Japanese officers, watching from their bridges, the sight is hard to reconcile with pre-war expectations, battleships, and heavy cruisers, turning back from a screen of thin-hulled tin cans and small carriers that refuse to run. For the sailors of Taffy 3, the result is plain enough. Their destroyers and destroyer escorts armed with 5-inch guns and a handful of torpedoes, and their escort carriers limited in speed and protection, have together forced one of Japan's main striking forces to retreat from its objective. In the wake of 25 October 1944, the Sea-Off Samar holds silent witness to Taffy 3's sacrifice. Wreckage from Johnston Hole, Samuel B. Roberts, Gambier Bay and Street. Low lies far below the surface, some of it in water more than 20,000 feet deep. Above them, the surviving escort carriers, Fanshawe Bay, White Plains, Kalinin Bay, and Kitkun Bay, make their way back toward Leyte Gulf decks, scarred by shrapnel and shell splashes but still operational. Rescue ships fan out across oil-slicked seas and scattered rafts, hauling exhausted men from the water after many hours adrift. Hundreds are saved. Many others never come home. The larger Battle of Leyte Gulf, to which Taffy 3's stand is central, secures the Philippine invasion and helps break the remaining power of Japan's navy. Kurita's center force withdrawing with 4 battleships still under his flag never again comes within reach of the vulnerable transports it had aimed to destroy. In the months and years that follow, the U.S. Navy takes hard lessons from Samar. The action confirms that destroyers and destroyer escorts, armed with 5-inch, 38 guns, and a handful of torpedoes, can play a decisive role against heavier ships when used aggressively and in concert with air power. Escort carriers designed for anti-submarine patrols and convoy cover prove they can influence a major fleet action when their aircraft are pushed forward and their captains are willing to risk the ships. Samar becomes a case study in war colleges and academies, not as a template for inviting disaster, but as an example of how smokescreens, close-range torpedo attacks, and repeated airstrikes from even modest flight decks can fracture a stronger opponent's plan. The Presidential Unit Citation, awarded to Taffy 3, speaks of extraordinary heroism in the face of superior forces. Commander Ernest E. Evans receives the Medal of Honor posthumously for taking Johnston into his first bold charge without waiting for orders and officers and crews from Heerman Samuel B. Roberts, and the carriers receive Navy crosses and other decorations. The term tin can, once a wry joke about thin-hulled destroyers, becomes a title of pride. The tin can sailor's identity endures in reunions and associations long after the war. Japanese naval staff officers, sifting through reports of the battle, are forced to confront the failure of battleship-centered doctrine. Destroyers and destroyer escorts they had dismissed as lightly built. Escorts use smoke and torpedoes to break up formations and draw the fire of battleships and cruisers. Carrier aircraft, even when armed with only small bombs or machine guns, kept pressure on the line and magnified the effect of each destroyer attack. The Imperial Navy, already drained of experienced aviators and major carriers, cannot replace the cruisers and heavy units lost or crippled around Leyte. American industry continues to turn out destroyers, escort carriers, and fleet carriers in numbers that Japan cannot match. As the war moves into 1,945 operations across the Pacific, carrier strikes, amphibious assaults, and strategic bombing build on the footholds and sea control secured in part by actions like Samar. Decades later, deep ocean expeditions locate the graves of Taffy III's lost ships. Johnston's wreck, first found in the late 2010 seconds and surveyed at depths greater than 20,000 feet, shows her bow crumpled, but her guns still pointed outward, a frozen echo of her last charge. New ships named Samuel B. Roberts Heerman and Ernest E. Evans carry the lineage into later generations. Their crews taught the story of 25 October 1944 as part of their inheritance. Naval historians describe the Battle off Samar as an anomaly in scale, but not in meaning. Small escort carriers and destroyers working together turned back a battleship fleet that by pre-war theory should have swept them aside. For Japanese officers who once laughed at American tin cans, the after-action analyses acknowledge a different truth. Taffy III's stand blends human nerve with the strengths of its engineered systems: radar-directed 5-inch guns, reliable torpedoes, radios that knit ships and aircraft into a single screen. It shows that destroyers and carriers, not battleships alone, shape the outcome of modern sea battles. And it all traces back to that first bold turn of a single destroyer toward Kurita's line, a charge that helped start the chain of decisions which sent a Japanese fleet running from Samar.